Today I will be demonstrating how to colour manga style using this design by professional manga artist Sonia Leong from Colouring Heaven issue 96 Manga Fantasy Special. I will be using marker pens with some coloured pencils as well. So the word manga refers to Japanese comics and graphic novels which have a very distinctive style of illustration. Manga characters generally have large eyes, small mouths and noses, as well as a wide variety of often unusual hair colours. Historically, they've been shaded in a more comic style way with little or no blending of colours. This is an example that I found on Pixabay. As you can see, it's coloured just like a comic, with completely distinct areas of shading and with no blending at all. However, now that virtually all manga is produced digitally, some artists use a lot more blending than they used to. So this image, which I think I also found on Pixabay, has got a bit more blending in places. As you can see, the areas of colour have got softer edges, but it's still easy to see the underlying comic style from where the areas of colour are lying. And you can also see more in this image, the characteristic large eyes and the small nose and mouth. Sometimes the nose is virtually non-existent. The backgrounds can be anything you like, with as much blending as you like, from abstract swirls to hyperreal cityscapes. So I'm going to start by using alcohol-based marker pens. And a very, very important thing to say right from the start is that when you're using marker pens, always put several layers of paper under the design that you're colouring, as they bleed through the paper really badly. So just to show you just how much it can bleed through, just use this colour. So if I put on several layers of colour here, you can see that it's actually bled through that sheet, and it's coming through underneath there. So if I'd used a darker colour, it might have bled through three or four sheets of paper. Another warning is that when you're opening the pens, hold them away from the image that you're colouring, because I actually have had a pen spatter onto the paper when I've opened it. I'm going to use two types of marker pen. I've got these Kurecolor pens, which are good quality, and I've had it for a long time. And I've also got these ones called Mosrac that I bought from Amazon. They're a budget range, and I just wanted to have more colours for doing this tutorial. What I found with the Mosrac ones, with as well as bleeding through the paper, they've actually bled across it as well, so they've spread out, which I think is one of the drawbacks of using budget markers. So what I've actually done is I've printed the design out onto bleed-proof paper, which is specially designed for markers and actually stops the colours bleeding through or spreading across. Now, the first thing to do when colouring an image is to decide where your light source is going to be. Generally, I like to choose a source that illuminates the face. So in this situation, it would be coming from the top left corner. So it would be lighting up most of the left side of her face and the left side of her body here, going down, with more shadow on her back. I'm going to use a technique that's based on the traditional manga comic style with very little blending. So I'm starting off with the skin, and I'm using 25 Salmon pink. I'm going to start by colouring the skin. I found that with marker pens, I like to work with the lightest colour as the base and then add layers of the darker shades. Now when colouring the face, you want to, if you can, try and leave a little triangle where her nose is white. But don't worry if you can't, you can always highlight it with a white pen later. And then I'm going to also leave a couple of areas for the whites of her eyes. There we go. And then apart from that, I'm just going to, there we go, just putting down a coating of the colour over the whole area. I'm going to leave the clothing and arm under the transparent wing uncoloured at the moment because I'm going to use a different technique on that area. There. Now hopefully that's dried. I want it to be dry because I don't want it to blend too much because I'm using the traditional manga comic style with very little blending. So to do the darker areas, I'm now using the Kurecolor number 200 pale pink. So I'm going to do a darker area under her chin and round her ears, and then inside, a bit inside her ears. And also the areas under her hair will be darker. So I'm just drawing those in. And she's going to have a little bit of shadow to show where her lower lip is, and also a little bit of shadow on the side of her nose. And then I'm going to draw a line from underneath her eye going round to the point of her chin and shade all of that to show where the shadow is falling on her face. And that's all we need to do there. Then on the arm we've got a bit of shadow where her sleeve is, and again I'm just going to draw a line to show what I'm going to shade. A line just following the shape of her arm around, and then just colour that in. Then on her hand, a little bit where her wristband is shadowing her, and the underside of her hand, her fingers, the bottoms of her fingers and the backs of her fingers, there. And again this arm, draw a line. This is all going to be shadow. A little bit where her knuckles are, there we go. Then her legs, she's going to have a bit of shadow where her skirt is falling. And also where her knees are. There, and that's the skin done. I'm going to do the eyes next. Manga eyes are a key feature of manga colouring. They usually have large areas of reflection in them, like in this example. The eyes on the design I'm colouring here are quite small, so I'm going to use my Caran Pablo pencils with sharp points, as the marker pens aren't fine enough. I'm going to keep the eyes simple, just an area of reflection. I'm going to use this turquoise blue 1714 with some darker blue around it. There are lots of different designs with larger eyes in issue 96, Manga Fantasy Special, which is on sale now. And also, don't forget to like this video, to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on future ones. So here we go, light blue or turquoise areas of reflection. I'll put a couple more in. I'm just doing circles. It's a bit small to see, and the same thing over here. And then I'm using Sapphire Blue 150 to fill in the gaps. And again, I'm not worrying about blending. Making the colour nice and vivid. I put quite hard pressure on there. There. Now the hair. I'm going to start off with deep yellow, number 32. So this is one of the Mosrac pens. Very often when you're doing the hair, manga artists will leave a white area to show where the light is being reflected. So in this case, it's kind of the front area of the hair and some of the areas on her pigtails. Colour the hair in a spiky way, using lines that follow the direction of the hair. So here we go, I'm going to start here. So you just use the strokes like that. So you make quite a sharp zigzag there, that will come up. Another one of the things I'm not so happy with these budget Mosrac pens is that the brush tips are quite soft, so it's quite hard to get sharp points with them, whereas the Kurecolor pens have got much harder tips, so you can do finer work with them. There we go, that's looking pretty spiky. And then I'm going to do a bit of shadow here in the crown of her hair. Again, I'm leaving pointy bits. Then this area I'm going to do completely yellow because it's going to be in shadow. This bit is going to be in shadow, but I'm leaving some white highlights here. And the same over here, I'm going to leave this bit with the white highlights. Leaving a bit of white there as well. I'm mostly just colouring these in yellow. I forgot I was going to leave this bit uncoloured, so I must be careful not to put any more colour down there. Right. Then I'm going to pick up my darker shade, which is 24 Marigold. And I'm just putting it where the areas of shadow would be falling. Again, keeping the same spiky motion. Yeah, so they're all directional strokes. Right then, now I've done the cut hair in quite a conventional colour, sort of yellow, though it has got quite some orange in it, but you could use any colour, pink, purple, blue, green, or anything you like to go with your colour scheme. I'm using a colour scheme that's based on the colours of the rainbow, as I'm going to do the wings in rainbow colours later on. However, Japanese artists and designers often use one of their traditional palettes, which tend to have very harmonious colours. If you'd like to try one of these, just do an internet search on Japanese colour palette. And if you become really interested, you can even buy books which give you a vast selection of different colour combinations. Now I'm going to start colouring the rest of her clothes. I'm going to carry on putting the base colour on first, and I am going to be leaving some areas white for highlights. So next of all, I'm going to do her ribbons. So I'm going to start with this colour, pale blue, number 77 in Mosrac. And again, as I said, I'm going to leave some white areas for highlights. So all the time you just need to think about where your light source is coming from. At the same time, once we're working on ribbons and the dress, think about how the fabric is going to be folding as well. So you want to try and follow the folds with your colour. So we're going to have shadow under her arm here. And we're also going to follow these fold lines. The artist has given us a lot of helpful indications about where the folds will be. I'm going to do this line here as these colours as well. I'm leaving some bits white. And lastly, her ribbons here. What I'm finding is with these Mosrac markers, I'm using a very, very light pressure to get a fine line with the brush. There, I think that's, oh no, there's one more bit here around her neck. And also this lacing down her back. There we go. Which also reminds me, I was going to do that area as being skin. So let's come back with the salmon pink. I'm just going to colour in this area here. I'm going to use now a darker lilac. This one is called 602 Lilac. And that's what I'm going to use for the darker areas of shadow. So concentrating on the bits that I think are going to be the darkest area of shadow. Again, the artist has been really helpful here, so concentrating on the areas where she's drawn the black lines. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to, you'll see how this gradually comes together more as I do more of the colouring. I'm going to put in some of this number 138 light pink, which is a colour I use later on for her petticoat. But I'm actually going to put some elements of it into the ribbon. And the reason why I'm doing this, is I'm putting it around the highlighted areas, is it'll make the colours at the end of when I finish the colouring, it'll make it seem more harmonious, to have little bits of the other colours that I've used mixed into some of the different areas. It'll bring it all together. There, I think I've got it all. Oh no, look, I've missed that whole section there. Now what I'm going to demonstrate now is there's a bit, if you remember up here, where I put some yellow colour where I didn't want it. And what you can do is you have to let it dry first, which is what I've done, is you can then get a blender pen. So this is the one that came with the Mosrac pens. It's just called a colourless blender. What you can actually do is, if you now go over the top of this with the colourless blender, it should lift some of the colour off. I'm not sure if it's actually working or not, but so a useful thing to know. There, I'll leave that to dry. I think it's lightened it. Now the dress I'm going to do in shades of green. So I'm starting off with Jade Green 171 Mosrac. I'm going to use the same technique again, so I'm just going to go over here. I'm leaving white highlights again, just colouring in, following where I think the shadow would be. Once you get into laying down the colour, you can work quite fast. Then on some of these areas I'm actually going to put on another layer of the same shade of green. This is a good way of getting a slightly darker colour to get slightly more subtle gradation of colour. So I'm putting this down. It's an intermediate layer because these areas are a little bit bigger. I'm putting them down as an intermediate layer before I go in with the really darkest shade. And next I'm going in with my darkest shade of green, which is Spectrum Green 172. That's a Mosrac shade. That's quite a bit darker, so what I am actually going to do a bit of blending here. I'm going to use the lighter Jade Green at the same time and actually go over, if you go over the edge, here we go, with the lighter shade, it does actually then blend a little bit. If you want to do this kind of blending, you need to do it while the ink is wet. So you'll still get a distinct area of colour, but it does just soften the edge a little bit. Right. Make sure I put the, oh no, I don't want to put these away yet, because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to colour the frills the same colour as her dress. So again, pretty much the whole thing I'm just going to cover with the lighter shade of blue, just leaving a few highlights in one or two areas, and then the darker shades here. Let's go over these bits of shadow with the lighter pen again. Oh, and I need to do these ones. The ones on her socks. Here we go. Right, it's tricky remembering to put the right lids on the right pens. There we go. And what I'm going to do again to create a harmonious colour image, I'm going to take one of the other colours I've used. So I'm taking the 77, the pale blue that I used to do her ribbons. Though I have to say it's not blue at all. It's called pale blue, but it's more of a lilac-y mauve colour. I'm just going to put a few little bits of that colour into some of the areas of shadow on the dress, and it'll just pull the whole thing together a bit more. Not doing a lot, just a few touches. There we go. I've just spotted that I need to do a little bit more work just up here. Oh, and there. Now her socks I'm going to do next. They are going to be quite simple. I'm just using a Mosrac Pale Blue 330. All I'm going to do is put on one layer of colour that just picks up a light area of shadow on her socks, because basically I'm giving her white socks, so they'll just have a very pale shadow. And at the same time I need to do her shoes, so I'm going to do those in the same colour as the ribbon. So it's out with the pale blue again, just marking out the areas of shadow. Then the lilac. And again, I'm going to add just a touch of the light pink, 138. There. Now I'm going to use some slightly different techniques for her petticoat, because I want it to be a lot more softer and pastel coloured. So I'm going to use a couple of different, I'm going to blend it a lot more, and I'm going to use a couple of different blending techniques with the colourless blending pen. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to use the light pink to start with. So what I'm going to do is to colour her petticoat, I'm going to use colours that I've used before in the rest of the design, but I'm going to make them much lighter. Now one way to do this is if you put on a layer of the colourless blender first, and then before it dries go straight in using a very light touch with the pink, it'll bleed out through the blender, and that will cause the colour, as it's spreading, it'll make it lighter. So I'm just going to do that sort of random areas. I'm just going to mix up the different colours fairly randomly. You can also, while it's damp actually, you can rub on a bit more of the blender pen. That'll help it spread out. You have to be a bit careful though, because if you put on too much, you can see it's starting to happen a little bit there. If you put on too much, the paper will buckle. Another way that you can get a lighter shade, I'm not sure if it's going to work so well with the pink because it's quite a pale colour anyway, but if you actually rub the tip of the colourless blender onto the tip of the pen, you can pick up, it's not working so well on the pink, I'll show it on a darker colour in a minute, but you can pick up a little bit of the colour and then lay it down on the paper. Now it's not working that well with the pink. I'll try when I come with a darker shade. And a bit up here. So the next colour I'm going to use is the same colour that I used on her socks. So that's a very light colour anyway, so I don't need to do anything special with that one. I can just colour straight in with it. And you can mix the colours up as well. Now I'm going to use the pale blue again, And I'm going to try that technique with the tip with this one, because it's a bit of a darker. Don't know if you can see that, but it is picking up a bit of the colour. There we go. It's giving us a really nice pale mauve. I'm going to pick some up from the other end. I think you have to wait for it to recharge a little bit, so I'm trying the other end as well. Here we go. There, so I'm not getting a vast amount of colour, just enough to give a subtle hint. You can actually see, I don't know if you can see on the video, you can see the pen nib getting lighter and lighter in colour as I'm lifting all the ink from it. So I'm now going to do one or two slightly darker areas of the pale blue. So I'm putting on the blender first. There, I think that's enough just to give a hint of the different colours in the petticoat. Right, and now I'm going to start with the wings, and I'm going to use a completely different technique here. Because the wings are translucent, I want to get a really smooth blend, but with very, very light shades, which is much easier to do with coloured pencils. Now, if you want a more detailed explanation of this technique that I'm going to use, see my earlier video that I did for Colouring Heaven on how to colour translucent fairy wings. So I'm not going to give you much explanation here. I'm just going to crack on with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is the rest of the clothes and the skin. So I want because we're looking through the wings, I want this to be a lot lighter. So I'm going in, I've tried to match my these are Prismacolors. I've tried to match my Prismacolors with the shades of the markers. So this is Light Peach, PC927. So I'm colouring with that. And this bit is skin as well. And then I'm using Deco Peach, PC1013 to put in the shadow. See, it's a much, much lighter shade, but I'm joining it to the shadow that I've already done with the marker pens. And then she's going to have just a bit of shadow under her arm here. The only other thing I need to do is the green of her dress. So I'm using, again, I found a matching shade of green Prismacolor, which is light green PC920. And Kelly green PC1096 for the areas of shadow. Now for the wings, I'm going to do a rainbow blend going from one tip to where it joins her body. But I'm using very light pressure because I don't want this to be a bright colour, just very subtle. I'll make the tips. The structural parts of her wing I'm going to make darker because those won't be translucent, they'll be solid. So on this version of the rainbow I'm using pink instead of red. So I don't actually use red in my rainbow transitions. And that's going to tone much better with the rest of her costume. So now we've done pink. We've got a bit of Lilac PC956. So I'm using small circular movements of the pencil. I am going to go over it at the end with a blender. So the next colour is blue, electric blue, PC1040. So where the wings overlap, just carry on doing the blend of the one on top. Then I'm going to pick up the light green again, PC920. Then the next one is yellow, so I'm using canary yellow, PC916. And what I'm doing at the same time is I'm just colouring in the yellow parts of her hair. Now this part of the wing is going to be a little bit paler because it's behind the other one. Then after yellow we've got orange. This is called orange, PC918. Then after the orange, we're back to pink again. Lilac. There. Now, I've gone a little bit dark there, so I'm going to use a bit of putty rubber. Here's my putty rubber. You just pull lumps off it. And what you do is you just dab it on the paper and it lifts off any excess pigment that you've got on there. So if you've just done a little bit too dark, it's really easy to correct it. Right, I'm going to just go over all of that now to smooth it out with my Derwent blender pen. Now try and remember, when you're using a blender pen, clean the tip on another piece of paper first, because it's probably covered in whatever colour you were blending the last time you used it. And then I'm just going to go over all these colours and get a lovely smooth blend. Now just check her over for areas that I've missed or haven't done her mouth. So I think her mouth would be light pink. So there we go. What else have I missed? Oh, I haven't done her, I need to do her antennae. So I'm going to make them pink, I think, to go with her wings, because I've done the tips of her wings pink. And lastly, I am going to find my white pen, rub it on a piece of paper to get it going. I'm not using a Posca pen because I wanted a finer tip, so I'm going to do a little bit of white just to highlight the bridge of her nose, and I'm actually going to do a little spot of white there to highlight her bottom lip. So that completes the colouring that I'm going to do for this design. Now that I've finished colouring this design, I'm going to do a more detailed explanation of how you would colour in a manga eye, because as I've said before, the ones in this design are quite small. So what I've done is I've drawn a larger eye design that I will do some work on. Now for this, I'm using my Caran Pablo pencils because it's easier to sharply outline areas of reflected light. And I'm going for a colour scheme that is pinks, purples and blues. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to outline I'm going to put in a lot of extra reflected areas. So I'm going to start by marking out where they're going to be. I'm also going to mark out with a darker pencil. You'll often find in manga colouring that the top section of the eye is darker than the bottom section, often with a sharp transition. So I'm going to just mark, I'm going to give it a little bit of a curve. I'm going to mark where the transition is going to be from dark to light. And then I'm going to mark in some extra areas of reflection. I'm going to do a whole string of them down here. This pattern of reflections actually matches or sort of ties in with the pattern of colours that you see if you take a close look at your iris. Then I'm going to do a smaller, more fragmented section here. Then in the top part of the eye, I'm going to mark it in pink because on this side, I'm going to use some pink on this side. So I'm going to put a reflection here, an oval reflection and a round one there. So what you can do is, so if I was starting to colour this image, it's already got this one reflection area marked, but you can put in as many as you want. And I'm going to do a bigger one up here and a smaller one here. And I'm actually going to begin with colouring this inner part, and for that I need my black pencil. So I'm starting with this black pencil, Ivory Black 496. Caran d'Ache do a black and an ivory black, and I find that the ivory black is a more intense colour, so it's good for areas that you really want to be black. So I'm going to have another reflection here, and then I'm going to colour part of the pupil black. I'm going to do it in this sort of shape, and then the rest in a very dark shade. So I'm going to make the black really black. And an area of reflection, another one here. So I'm going to go ahead and colour this one in, and I'm going to make it pink. So that's just going to be a solid colour. Then, because this area is going to be darker than the rest of the eye, I'm going to start with some of my darkest shades that I'm going to be using. So I've got Prussian Blue 159, which is going to go around here. I'm actually going to lighten it up with a little bit of Sapphire Blue 150. And then blend that completely into the Prussian blue. even though manga doesn't use much blending in the rest of the colouring, very often in the eyes it will be completely blended. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm demonstrating a blended eye. And the darkest shade of blue that I'm going to use, which is Indigo 139. Just improve the blend here. I'm using small circular movements because I want to get a really, really smooth finish with this. So we're blending up, then go back with the indigo, blend, take it right the way around the top. And then I'm going to put some purple into it. Now, this is actually called Violet, which is 129, and the very top part I'm adding Violet. As I've got my dark colours out now, I'm going to work on this top part of the eye. So I'm starting off with the pink again. I think I forgot to say, it's actually called Light Purple 091. So I'm going to colour the whole of this highlight here in pink. A nice bright pink colour, there we go. Rather strong, I wanted a bit strong colour. Then I'm going to do some fairly random pink areas, which I'm then going to blend in with the other colours. So sort of joining up this pink area, deeper pink here. It's going to spread out. It's very abstract, the way that you colour an eye. You want to be aiming for having a very striking combination, very dramatic. So now I've done a bit more pink. I'm going to do an area of slightly lighter blue over here. So this is the sapphire blue. I'm careful to leave very crisp edges around the reflection. I think what I'm hoping for here is that it's going to look a little bit like a galaxy or something. Oops, gone over the edge a bit there. So I'm going to get my trusty Derwent electric eraser and just get rid of that. There we go. So I've laying down an area of lighter blue, which is going to blend in with the pink. Then for this section here, I'm going to, because I want to have a very distinct transition between the bottom of the eye and the top, I'm going to pick my darkest blue, which is the indigo blue. I want to turn the paper around a little bit, and I'm actually going to do a line of the darkest blue and then colour, bring it down a little bit, colour upwards. Being careful to go round the edge of the reflection. And gradually lighten that so it's going to blend in with some other colours. So lighten it up there. Then do the same thing here on the other side. I think I might bring it down a little bit lower as well. So I'm blending up into the blue I'm actually going to bring this dark area down a little bit more on both sides. So I'm going to go over all the areas with a light coating. I'm going to stop about there. And then in this section, I'm going to use the violet. And we're going to have a purple section, which I'll blend in with the dark blues. Right, what I'm going to do, now I've got these different areas of colour mapped out, I'm going to go over it all with firmer pressure because I want to get really, really bright colours. I'm just going to give my indigo a sharpen. And I'm going to go over these areas with the violet as well. That'll make them really intense. Luckily, a lot of this demo is just colouring, so you can speed it all up. Then I'm going to use my Prussian blue here. This is Prussian blue 159 and the indigo blue. Brightening up the pink area. So this is the violet again, blend into the pink a little bit more. Then I think what I'm going to do, just to make the pink really bright, is I'm actually going to take a Prismacolor Hot Pink PC993. Just it's a slightly more vibrant shade, so I'm going to go into the surrounding colours to get an even better blend. Then use the indigo blue, darken the bit closest to the eyelid. So that's the top part of the eye done. So what I've done here is I've used the dark colours to do the upper dark section, but I've included some clear spots of reflected light, and I've also included some lighter areas to indicate some more general light reflections. Now on the lower part of the iris, I'm going to use lighter colours. So to start with, this is going to be the lightest area here. So I'm going to take my very lightest shade, which is light green 181, and I'm just going to colour the whole area here. At the moment I'm using directional strokes because I want to go around the edge of these areas of reflection, and I want to get really sharp edges, not blurry ones. So I'm just rotating the paper so I can keep with vertical strokes because I find that slightly easier. I'm trying to do it at an angle. And around these ones. down here. If you can see, I've kept the lower edges of these areas of reflected light in line. Now I'm taking the sapphire blue and I'm going to start off with gentle pressure, circular strokes here, because I want to blend. I'm from the join with the darker part of the eye and blend into the lighter shade. So I've got the blend done now. So again, I'm going to turn around and a little bit more pressure. I'm going to make the top part a lot more vivid. Kind of going for a sort of oval shape here. Then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Being careful to go around the reflected light. Make sure that you've coloured right up to the darker area. It doesn't matter if you go over the edge a bit. Then we're going to go around here. And also make it a bit darker right around the edge. This is quite a thin area of shading around here. I'm actually going to make it a bit darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. Make this darker as well. Then I'm going to make this area here a little bit darker still by using the Prussian blue. Then just finish off the blending with this one, Turquoise Blue 171. I'm actually going to do the whole of this section here. Now I'm going to make it turquoise and round here. It's slightly darker than the lightest shade. There, so that is a more detailed demonstration of how to colour a manga style eye. And you can use, whatever colours you feel like. They do red eyes, yellow eyes, green, blue, anything you can think of. Again, it's a good idea to have a look on the internet and see some other examples. So there we are, all finished. And all the colours that I've used in this video are listed down below in the description box, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on future ones.